I'm just going to hold for a minute here as I see the number of participants ticking up as everyone comes in from the waiting room. Okay, it's still ticking up, but I think I'm going to start. So welcome everybody, and thank you so much for coming along to attend our webinar this evening, which is celebrating 250 of our students now being published authors, including the 250th student who is here with us on the panel this evening, and also taking a look at the path to publication from starting out as a writer to getting your agent, to getting a publisher, and how that whole process looks. We've already had a number of questions from people sent in, and we're going to try to answer lots of those, and I'll direct them to different members of the panel. And you can also send through more questions during this webinar. And if you would send those to the Q&A, I know that we have the chat open as well, but if you would send them to the Q&A, that would be really great so that we can pick them up and direct them to the panelists if there's time. So yes, welcome everybody. I'm Anna Davis. I'm the Managing Director and founder of Curtis Brown Creative. And I've in my time been a novelist, been a literary agent, and been a creative writing lecturer. So I've sort of brought it all together in this role. And with me, I'm very delighted to say we have Manish Chauhan, who is our 250th published author. We're delighted to see you, Manish. And Manish took one of our courses in London, where he met his agent, Gordon Wise, who we have here. And I'm going to get them all to introduce themselves a little more fully in a minute and tell you a bit about where they're at in the process. And I have Lucy Rose, who is another of our authors, and she wrote a wonderful book called The Lamb that has been published recently, and in fact went to #2 on the Sunday Times hardback fiction chart. And Lucy was one of the mentees of our Breakthrough Writers Programme, mentoring for LGBTQIA+ writers. And I'll come back to that a little bit later on as well. And now we have also Alexa von Hirschberg, publishing director of Weidenfeld and Nicholson, who is Lucy's publisher. So we've got two authors, one on his way to being published, one now published. We have an agent, and we have a publisher in the house. Manish, I'm just going to come to you first to perhaps tell us a little bit about you and your book, and how things are for you now.
Thanks, Anna. Yes, I joined. So when I wanted to apply for the 3-month novel writing course, I wrote the novel that I'm currently is going to be published for the purposes of the application. So my kind of like journey with that novel and CBC has been kind of like from the beginning, if that makes sense. It was after about a year, I think. No, a few months after I finished the course, I entered. I think it was the first novel prize that CBC was running, which has then now become the Discoveries Prize, I think. But yes, at the time, then the novel was, well, the excerpt longlisted, and it was because of that. Then I got an email from Gordon asking how much I had written, if there was anything more, and it was a year after that that I then sent him my the manuscript. So yeah, it's going to be published in spring next year.
And that's going to be published, and it's called Passages, and it's going to be published by Faber.
No, so the
Not
name
called
is
Passages
different.
anymore.
No, the name is Belgrave Road, which is a very significant road in Leicester, which is where the novel is set.
Oh, fantastic.
So, yeah.
I think I still have the
Road.
name written. And you've also got a short story collection being published by Faber as well.
Yes, so it was a 2-book deal. The short stories will come out afterwards. I'm not sure exactly when, but yes, there's a short story collection.
And you were actually shortlisted for the BBC's very prestigious National Short Story Award last year with Pieces.
Yes, yeah, and I was very shocked, very, very shocked when that happened. I don't think I quite understood what it meant, But it was a great opportunity. Really good writing, really good writers. Got to meet some very good people, and then have my work read by lots of people, which was also really nice. And it was very much the kind of, I feel it was the kind of the wind we needed at the time to kind of get people to read the these short stories and also the novel, and it worked. It worked. So yeah,
Brilliant.
very happy.
Well, we're very excited for your publication, which I think is in spring 2026, and we'll be
Yeah,
getting behind that. I'm
thank
going to
you.
come over to Lucy, Lucy Rose, whose literary horror, The Lamb, is now out there, and I strongly suggest everybody gets hold of it because it's quite a read. And yeah, Lucy, tell us a little bit about your situation, how you came to be published.
So I started writing The Lamb, and I've always wanted to do, like, at this point in my career, I was like, I've always wanted to do something with Curtis Brown Creative, actually. Not to plug, but and the breakthrough mentorship for LGBTQ plus writers came up, and I saw Kirsty Logan was a mentor. And I'm perhaps Kirsty's biggest fan, and she knows this now, after having working with me on the mentorship, and we worked together for several months. She read excerpts of my work and was able to point things out that I just didn't have the experience or knowledge to kind of realize yet. It was just the most amazing, like, genuinely life-altering experiences. And from there, I got my agent through kind of the query help that happens at the end of the breakthrough mentorship. And then I worked with my lovely agent Kath, who's also at Curtis Brown, to get my book out there. And I'm so grateful that she sent it to Alexa, because I've loved every second of working with her on it. But yeah, that's kind of how The Lamb came to be.
That's fantastic. I mean, I will just mention, so the breakthrough mentorship that Lucy mentioned there, we have the Breakthrough Writers Program, which is some free opportunities for underrepresented writers, talented underrepresented writers, and we run various programs and scholarships. There's a number of scholarships available for application now, and also the very program that Lucy actually came to us through, which is our LGBTQIA plus mentorship, is open again for applications. And that's, I know, obviously many of our courses do cost money, but those courses are and mentorships are completely free. So if anyone wants to have a look at those. We're going to come back to talk about your experience of being published a little bit later, but I'm kind of going to come next to Gordon Wise, my lovely colleague at Curtis Brown. Hi, Gordon.
Hello.
Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself and also working with Manish?
Sure. Well, I'm an agent of 20 years standing now at Curtis Brown. Worked with Anna all those years. And I worked with Anna before she'd even conceived the idea of Curtis Brown Creative, which was this very exciting thing that has evolved. And obviously we're all these deals later now. And before that, I was a publisher publishing non-fiction, much more than fiction, to be honest. But then I changed sides, and then when I became an agent, I realized I could back any horse I believed in. That was sort of the joy of an agent. If you are a publisher, you tend to have a particular remit that you have to follow. As an agent, you can represent anything you feel you have competency in. And I always do this miming thing. I talk about being a switchboard operator, which probably means you have to be over 70 to remember how switchboards operated like that. But I think of people like Alexa while I'm reading a book like Manish's and think, would she like it, and how I can do that. I'm sure that's how Lucy and Alexa met via my colleague Catherine. And working with Manish, well, as you said, yes, it began through a prize. When Curtis Brown turned 120, we thought we'd do something new, which was to do a debut prize, which, as you say, has migrated into Discovery. So that was in 2019. If anyone remembers, 2019 was shortly before 2020, which was the pandemic. So we began our relationship long range. And the book at that point, you talked about the book title. In those days, it was called Mira and Talil, but the name of the protagonists. It became Passages a little while ago, and then it became Belgrave Road. It might have been a couple of other things in between, but we'll save that for the British Library archives later. It is the story of Mira and Talil, we worked together on it. I submitted it. I thought it was pretty clear it was a book about Mira and Talil. And lots of people came back and said, why did Mira's story suddenly switch to Talil's halfway through? Uh, so that we then went through another stage of development of layering the story, and it's gone through several cycles. And then one of the joy of working with Manish is that he's incredibly self-starting as a writer. Obviously, an agent does all they can to promote their clients' work to those they are meeting and talking to, but there is nothing like an author being a self-promoter, which doesn't mean being an exhibitionist, but it means caring about your work, believing about your work, seeing where it can go. Manish individually began entering a lot of other competitions, short story competitions, and the nods and the recognitions just kept notching up until last year he gave me this call and said, you know, you're going to be contacted by the BBC to sign an NDA because something has happened, and that was the short story competition. And actually, it's paradoxical that you use. Most publishers will say they don't want to publish short stories until the authors run out of ideas, or you've done 5 novels and then you have to do a story collection or something like this. But because the stories gained such had such impact thanks to the competition, I was then able to say to publishers quite casually, "Oh, and he's working on his first novel. Oh, we'd love to see the first novel. That would be great." We were actually well into drafting the second novel by then, but that's how it all came together. So, you know, a big takeaway is continuing to be proactive as a writer about your own work, you know, even if the professional relationships have begun.
I think that's really good point for writers generally as well, that you don't just write a novel and then sit there and send it out and wait for something to happen with it, you know, and wait. It's good to keep moving, to keep writing, to keep improving and raising your game the whole time. Can I come to Alexa now then? So Alexa, publishing director of Weidenfeld and Nicholson, previously with Faber actually, who are Manish's publisher. Alexa, would you like to tell us a bit about yourself and your work, and also how you've come to work with Lucy?
Yes, absolutely. So I've been in publishing now for 18 years, and I started out at Canongate. Canongate Books were fantastic indie, and then was at Bloomsbury for a long time, another indie, although much larger than Canongate, and I worked there for 11 years, publishing a real mixture of fiction and non-fiction. So I predominantly at Weidenfeld and Nicholson publish fiction, but I do also enjoy select narrative non-fiction. I also, like, it's interesting what Gordon was saying, I also have quite wide tastes, and I've enjoyed working at companies where you're allowed to work across different genres. That very much appeals to me as a publisher. I was at Faber for a number of years running the music list there, but also publishing fiction and non-fiction. And I've been at WNN for a couple of years, and it was an absolute joy to receive Lucy's manuscript, which really had me from the first page and from the first sentence, which if any of you have read it will know that it's quite shocking and also sensual and intriguing. And the story of Margot and her mama in the woods in Cumbria, in their cottage, it arrested me from the first moment, and it has been such a joy to work with Lucy both editorially and to watch her grow as a public author, and of course to see the reaction from readers. It has been quite phenomenal actually, and booksellers. The booksellers have really taken this book to their hearts. It's been amazing to see the response from booksellers, from Waterstones, from indies, from all over the place. It's a total joy.
Fantastic. What a brilliant way to start a writing career. I'm going to take some of the questions now that have come in to us ahead of this webinar from many of you, and I'm going to direct them around to some of our panelists to make sure that we get a chance to ask everything that you want to know. And I might start with a couple of questions to the writers, if that's okay. And so I'm going to ask Manish. We've had a question about how you keep playful in your writing, which comes from Amy. How you keep a spirit of play in your writing and keep yourself interested and interesting on dull days. How does that work for you, Manish, in your writing?
It can be tricky, I'm not going to lie, but at the same time, I think of writing as just any other job. You go into the office every day, whether you're happy about it or not, and you kind of have to, and if you're not happy, what do? You whinge to your colleagues, you take a holiday to kind of revive that energy. But what I think has really been helpful to me has been being part of writing groups, because I think if you're comfortable, and I think people should be comfortable letting their work out into the world to be critiqued and read, and for people to receive feedback on their work. I think if you can do that, each time you do that, or each time you do a round of your draft, there's a new energy that kind of works on the text. And I think that's quite a good way of building or maintaining that playfulness. But yes, there are hard days, of course there are. But I think that's the kind of trick that I found. Having useful writers.
Is that the writing group that you met through Curtis Brown Creative, or is that another writing group that you've met outside?
So I'm part of 3 writing groups at the moment, and one of them is very much the people I met at Curtis Brown Creative. That was the first one that I was part of. Yeah, it's very. I think having some trusted readers who can really offer you. They might not have to write what you write, but somebody you can be generous and honest. That's really important for your work, I think. And I think that's really important. So that's what I would say. Oh, there's some work happening suddenly. Sorry, I'm going to just mute. But yeah,
don't worry. Thank you, Manish. And yeah, Lucy, do you have any thoughts on staying playful in your writing and getting through the dull days?
I think I'm still figuring that out. I think that it changes every day. At the minute, if I'm having like a wobble with my writing, I just try to kind of remind myself how lucky I am that I can write. It's the access to language and storytelling is like actually just like the biggest privilege, and it's so magic that like you get to connect with people in that way. So just kind of reminding yourself of that kind of base level thing, I think can be really valuable. And just like the magic of books and stories, and like, I'm constantly going back to my favorite books to kind of reread different passages that inspire me and things that have sparked inspiration in the past. Yeah.
Great. And what's the biggest challenge, would you say, you've had to overcome in your writing journey, Lucy?
Oh, that's a tough question. So I think probably the toughest thing that I've personally had to overcome is like I just wasn't the most engaged student at school. So I really actually taught myself how to write when I was about 18. Before then, I had like 0 skills, like I couldn't spell, I had no concept of grammar, and I did an undergrad that was really useless. So I took up a part-time job and went and studied an MA part-time and kind of paid my way through and like really taught myself like the base skills that I needed to be a writer. I've always loved oral storytelling, and that's kind of was my route in. But it was just such an amazing experience and such a huge challenge to kind of start properly committing to reading and to reading widely, stuff that is kind of outside my comfort zone, that has challenged me and pushed me and sparked inspiration in unexpected places. I would probably say that's kind of been the biggest challenge. It's definitely the thing that I'm most proud of, because it's not easy to learn those skills from the ground up, with kind of nothing else there.
I think that's right. Though I think I would also say that one of the really great things about writing novels is that you can teach yourself, that you can learn from your reading, that you can learn from being in your writing group and through doing it. And, that's one of the wonderful things about it. What was your biggest challenge in your writing journey, Manish?
I think, well, I started writing when I was 16. But I think I was 30 before I actually began to write regularly, like most days. And so there was a big sort of stretch of time when I was kind of training to be a lawyer, where I wasn't writing at all, but I wanted to be a writer. But what was missing was the fact that I wasn't writing. So there was no discipline. And then one of my mentors from when I was very young mentioned this to me, and she said, well, when's the last time you said no to a restaurant or drink or clubbing or something? If you want writing as a job, which is what you're saying you do want to do, then why are you not writing? What? And then she said that, and I kind of like, oh, yes, it clicked. And then after that, I was writing, and I think for the past 10 years, I pretty much have written like most days, really. And I think that shows because the success I've had in writing has been in the last 10 years. So I think it's a case of just keep going. Building discipline is really important, especially if you want to build a body of work. I think I've learned to not be a slave to inspiration. That's also been really important. But yeah, discipline for me has been hard, but I think I'm there now, more or less.
That's great. Thank you, Manish. I'm going to ask some questions to the professionals in the room now. Not that Manish and Lucy are not professionals, I have to add. Gordon, let's ask an agent question that we've had in. Kate asks, is it always best to have finished your first draft before approaching agents or publishers?
I think so, because I mean, a pitch can be very beguiling, even to the writer themselves, but can you execute it? And actually, one well-known novelist I've represented says, even after many, many books, he said, I don't know what book I've written until I finished it. I think things can change. When you begin to have a conversation with an editor or an agent, they will interact with you. You need to know what parts you've got to move around and shuffle. You need to know how madly in love you are with the A story, the B story. Does a certain person have to die? Does a certain person have to marry? You need to know the variables. So, I think you could use your writing group for pitches to see who's responding well to a story, but ultimately it is about the execution.
Right. That's pretty much, I think even Kate, who asked the question, was expecting that would be the answer, but writers
Sorry, there's no quick fix.
Writers so very often hope that the answer might not be that.
Yeah.
But it is, in the end, writing a book does come down to writing the book. I'd like to put one to Alexa. So Flora asks what it's like to work with an editor and how many rounds of edits are you likely to go through?
Oh, that's very different. It's very different depending on the author and what the book needs. When you usually with fiction, you as Gordon said, you'll be looking at a pretty complete draft that's probably been workshopped by your friends in your writing groups. Your agent will have probably done a couple of rounds with you, and so by the time it's reached me, it's in pretty good shape, in theory. And then part of the before you work with an author, you will sit down and talk to them, because relationships are kind of absolutely everything in this business, and you need to feel that you trust that vision, and your editor may have questions. I do think the best editorial conversations are that they're conversations, they're dialogue, they're asking questions, and I think pretty quickly whether those are the right sort of questions that suit your work or that you really respond to. So before you start that publishing process, you'll probably have a pretty good idea of what your editor wants to do or feels is necessary for the book, and how many, and they'll usually have a sense of how long that's going to take. I have done I've done 10 rounds with authors before, and in fact I've worked with authors where, and particularly on the non-fiction side actually, where I didn't really know what the book was going to be, because non-fiction tends to be acquired on a proposal, and I've factored that into the publishing schedule. I think it's going to take a couple of years for us to get to a point where this is finished, and I've loved those experiences, because I imagine it's something that agents feel all the time actually, where you arrive at something that you knew there was this promise, but actually at the end it turned out it's got more memoir in it than you expected or whatever. But with I would say on average with novelists, I tend to do a couple, at least, and I would say that the work I do is, it's mainly structural editing, and I'm sure, I don't know if you know the difference between the kind of structural edit and the copy edit and the proofread, but there's lots of different rounds of editing that we do in the publishing house, and your commissioning editor will traditionally do what's called a structural edit, which is the big picture question. So we'll be thinking about your characters, we'll be thinking about the plot, we'll be thinking about the ending, which is something that Lucy and I thought about. And once we've sort of read it a few times, you sort of lose it. We call it, when someone reads something for the first time, we say it's fresh eyes, and that's what the copy editor then brings, is a new set of fresh eyes to look for traditionally accuracy, consistency, and sense. And then once it's typeset on the page, then there'll be another proofreader that comes in to look for typos once it's typeset. So it's a long old process, I think sometimes if you're new to this journey, you don't realize how many rounds you might do. I'd be interested in Manish's experience and Lucy's, from that first idea, from that first spark to the finished book or to that book deal, how many rounds you've done.
I think that's a very good question. Perhaps we will just ask them briefly. Yeah, Manish, how many rounds of edits have you done? Are you still editing? Are you still in the midst of it? Oh,
Was he frozen?
He's frozen. We'll come to Lucy and then come back to Manish. Lucy.
I'm trying to remember. I think before we gave it to you, I think I probably did 2 or 3 by myself, and then I think I did 2 rounds with Kath. But they were 2 quite intensive. Yeah. Like my edit letter from Curtis Brown was like 14 pages or something. Wow. Nice. 14 pages of really helpful gold and brilliant stuff, but 14 very long pages.
Gosh. And yeah, Manish, I'm sorry that you've obviously just been having a few technical problems there, but we were just finding out how much editing have you had to do so far? Have you had to do many rounds with Gordon and with your editor Louisa Joyner?
So yeah, sorry, I got kicked out for some reason. Anyway, back now. With Gordon, we had to do in the first submission round, we did like 1 round. Then subsequently, we did about 2 or 3, I think. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah. Oh, are you still there, Manish?
Yeah, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. It's a little bit ticky, but don't worry. I'll let you know if we can't. Okay. And yes, have you done much editing with Louisa yet?
I'm on the 2nd round at the moment with Louisa, yeah. Because part of the kind of the arc of one of the characters is the asylum process, basically in the UK, which over the course of the years that I've written the novel has changed a bit. So it's just making sure everything is kind of accurate and kind of stitched correctly with the novel. So that's what we've been working on at the moment. It's a bit, the soul of the novel is very much the same. It's kind of the nitpicky things that we're kind of ironing out at the moment. But yeah, I'm on the 2nd round at the moment.
I think it's really interesting for writers to know that, your novel remains your novel, but these various people come in who can look at it in different ways and help you to make it the best version of itself. And actually,
I think so.
If you as a writer feel intimidated sometimes by the quality of what you read from bookshops, it's worth remembering that all the stages that go through before a book arrives there, I think.
And I think if I can just add something, I think what if you're talking about the professionals are looking for is, as you meet an author, you're slightly scanning them for their willingness to have the editorial conversation, because it's going to have to happen, either for the agent introducing it to someone like Alexa, for Alexa talking to her colleagues about it, and even for it to go into the outside world. So, but you don't want someone just saying, take it, have it, do whatever you like to make it work. It's a dialogue, it's a conversation. Ultimately, we're always going to respect where the author wants to take the story. If they want to take a particular story in a way that you really don't get or understand, I think we would have a honest conversation with you. Is this really the next book that you should be writing? But you're definitely looking for an openness, and then you're looking for respect in both directions, that we don't invade, but similarly that the author will listen.
Great.
I think this kind of feeds into the question about should the novel be complete, or should the draft be complete before I approach an agent? And I really think the more I think about it, I think yes, it should be, because then the soul of the novel is kind of like set out, and so there's this less kind of, if someone buys it, they're buying the soul of it, and then the changes will be kind of in the peripheries of that, but the soul stays the same. Whereas I think if you just send a few chapters and get some deal on that, there's a chance that it could be a bit distorted.
Yeah.
I love
If
the
that
way
makes
you
sense.
put that, Manish, about looking for the soul of a novel. That's such a lovely way of putting it. I think that's absolutely right. I am looking for a project that has a really clear vision and a clear sense of itself when I'm looking at a submission, and when that's there, you know you can work with it. Absolutely, I love that.
Brilliant. I'm going to move on to some other stuff here, and Manish, I'm going to ask you. We've had a question from someone called Sue, who says, "What advice do you have for those looking to apply to submit their work for a writing course or a competition?" And obviously, that's something you've had quite a bit of success with. So, do you have any thoughts?
I would say, I mean, go for it. Don't be afraid. The BBC, I never thought. So the story that got the BBC shortlisting was rejected by a literary magazine roughly the same time. So you can never really tell where something's going to take you. And so I think just be brave in that, but also be porous to feedback. It's really important. Let your work out there, and understand that feedback is not, it's for your ego, it's for the work. You want your work to be the best that it can be. And as a writer, I think as you get more experience, you realize that what you think is good versus what actually is good, the space becomes narrower and narrower. The more you write, the more you receive feedback. And the aim is to kind of get to a place where it's like this. Even now I'm writing something and I think, oh, this will be crap tomorrow. But then the gap is narrower. And I think once the gap is narrow enough and you can see something in your writing and you can think, okay, this is working, it's making me feel something, then enter competition. Competitions are a really good way of getting an agent to come to you rather than you having to chase them, basically. And certainly in my journey, competitions have played a massive part, because it kind of has led to a lot of things.
I think that's very good advice. But also do be selective about the competitions that you enter. Make sure that the prize of the competition is something that you definitely actually want to win, because some of them may not be. And I'm going to ask a question to Lucy. Lucy, you've been getting a reputation as an author who is incredibly good at working social media. And I know that that is something. So we've had a question from Caitlin, who asks, can you speak to the role of social media in an author's success, both in securing a publisher and in selling their book? And so, yeah, I wondered if you had any thoughts on that.
Oh, I'm so chronically online. It's actually terrible. To the point where, like, sometimes I'm speaking in the office and no one actually knows what I'm talking about, because the lingo is literally like was invented hours before I'd spoken it. It's interesting because I feel like there's social media kind of, that it's such a two-sided thing. Like, there's some really negative things about social media, but for me, I've less used it as kind of a tool for success and just a way to connect with people, I think. Especially as kind of an author who's in the North, I'm like so siloed off from like the literary world. Having that kind of space to reach people who I wouldn't be able to reach normally is just like so invaluable. And I've just found it to be like a really helpful piece of the puzzle. Like, I don't think social media on its own can build any kind of success. It's just like a small piece of like the bigger machine, that kind of the team that brings a book to life, because it's not one person ever working on a book. It's a massive team of very passionate, dedicated people who really make that happen. But I've got to say, I've loved using social media to find my people. It has been like such a lovely part of the process, to experience that. And it's fun if you're chronically online. So it's great.
I mean, I know that a lot of authors are quite afraid of social media, or actually also just feel like, I don't want to have to do that. That's not for me. Am I going to have to do that? I mean, actually, perhaps for Gordon and Alexa as well, what do you think about, do you think it's essential that authors do that kind of work, social media work, and kind of the public profile?
No, it's not essential. The work is essential. It's really as simple as that. I didn't know Lucy was as brilliant at connecting with readers on social media when we first started working together. I connected to the characters, I connected to the setting, I connected to the work, and but of course it is immensely helpful when you have an author who understands, you know, the different mediums and who knows how to, who's very natural. You know, I would say some authors who try and fake it comes across, you know, you can't fake it. I think you either love the process, you enjoy connecting with people through social media, and you know, but if you're not, then it's not going to work, and it actually won't really help. So it's an incredibly useful piece of the puzzle, but it's not everything. And I think I work with authors who don't have any social media accounts at all, and we still make their work a success. But I'm not going to deny that it isn't useful from a publishing point of view. It is.
And I think however much one dislikes it, it is part of the conversation. Even if you're not using it, your readers are engaging with it. So you've got to understand how the platforms are operating. I think things, you know, is it a rapidly changing world? We might have said a few years ago it was essential to be engaged with certain platforms. Now I think we know what the noise is that's going on, and you know, it is quite actually hard to promote novels on a visually led platform. You know, and that's why you have to be part or aware of the conversation, because it does evolve, and actually someone wasting a lot of time on the wrong kind of social media now would not be productive, but it is there. And I think if you can talk, if your publisher is a good publisher, they'll have a conversation with you about what's moving the dial, what they can be doing, what actually happens sort of silently in the background through tickling algorithms and different things. So it's not all public facing, but you have to, you know, you've got to engage with the publishing process, and that is part of the publishing process.
Yeah. Thank you. Gordon, I'm going to ask, we have a question from Lance who says, in a pitch letter to an agent, what are the 3 biggest turn-offs, and what kind of thing makes you perk up?
Oh, being boring is the big turn off. You know, a book's got to interest you, so that you want the cover letter to be interesting. At the same time, you don't want to come in and say something completely ridiculous. I want to get a slight sense of the person's personality. I certainly don't want, I've written a book, would you read it? You want some kind of tease. I mean, presumably, if you're a writer, you read books. You look at the sorts of blurbs that are put on the back of books. What are the 3 or 4 sentences that hook you? And actually, if you do the Curtis Brown course, you spend a lot of time on pitching. Sometimes people are pitching books they have written. Sometimes they haven't actually written them yet, but they're trying to hone the idea down and make sure that that thread remains constant. So it's piquing my attention. I mean, there isn't a fail-safe thing, but yeah, the 3 things. Yeah, why are you approaching me? Why should you be writing it? What's in this story? Those are the 3 beats I would definitely want to get covered off.
And I think we always tend to say, I mean, I find when we look at students' pitch letters that they're writing, they always tend to be too long, actually. Getting it nice and concise is really useful.
The great thing about a submission is it has several ways of saying the same thing. So the cover letter can be short and punchy, and you know, if it was still printed, it would be 1 page. You then got your synopsis or your overview, which can be a bit longer. You've then got a good chunk of the book yourself, so you don't have to, you know, completely replicate each one. They've each got their own purpose.
Absolutely. Alexa, we have a similar question for you, though slightly different. Kathy asks, as an editor, when you're reading a new submission from a literary agent, what do you look for? What's likely to get your attention and make you think, oh, this is something different?
So the first thing to say about that is that I don't work on my own. I work in a team. And so what I'll be looking for will be affected by what we already have on the list and what we have coming up in the next couple of years. So if I turn down your novel, it's not necessarily because I don't think it's brilliant, or because, you know, I don't think it has value. it could just be because we have another literary horror coming that year, or we have a novel set in this place, or whatever it might be. There might be many different reasons. So the first thing to say is, if it feels completely original and feels like it's distinctive from everything else that's happening in the company, then I'll pay it more attention. I might sometimes just turn something down straight away because there's just, it's not gonna work on our list. And then I'll look at the submission letter and get a feel for the pitch. I mean, just as what Gordon was saying, I'm looking for the similar things. I'm looking for something arresting, exciting. But actually, I don't study the pitch in detail personally. I start reading the work, and I think almost quite quickly, I get a sense of whether I feel connected to that material. I won't say that I read the whole thing, because that would take forever. I get, between 3 and 4 and 15 submissions a week. So that would be crazy. But I'm looking for, I like to be altered in some way, whether that's because of the originality of the idea or the quality of the writing. It really depends. I tend to be drawn to novels that are rooted in the landscape. I tend to be drawn to stories that are powered by big ideas that are about social change or politics or history. I love it when authors are grappling with a big idea, and I also can tell when there's an attention to their craft. I get very excited by writers who are pushing the form, or pushing me, challenging me in some way. So all those things will be going through my mind. And also, sometimes I'll think I'll just look at this for a minute, just, to see, maybe not likely or whatever, for whatever reason, and I won't stop reading it. So that's the ultimate test, isn't it? Is when you're absolutely, you can't keep your eyes off the page. You want to know what's happening. That I'm sure that's with all of most people on this call, I imagine, are readers, right? And I'm a reader too. So
excellent. I hope everybody on this call is a reader. I think it's vital if you're a writer. Lucy, a question for you that I've just spotted in the Q&As from Liz Bland, who says, I can't wait to read The Lamb. And she says, can I ask Lucy what attracted her to the horror genre?
Oh, so I'm going to confess something here, which is that for the longest time, I was a complete scaredy cat and I wouldn't even allow people to watch horror films around me, because just on the off chance that it gave the spirits ideas or something, because I was like, I just don't want to invite that into my home. Until when I was a teenager, I watched The Innocents, which is an adaptation of The Turn of the Screw that came out in 1961. And it was just something clicked in my soul. I swear, like I understood the world, and the world made sense to me, and this was the language that I wanted to communicate in. And a lot of things started to click together. Like when I was a kid, I loved telling scary stories and being the person who was being told campfire stories that chilled me to my bone, and like all the local folk tales about like the Croglin vampire and the Waterhouse witch, and just suddenly like things just started to click into place for me. And I think it's just such a special genre because it's so allegorical and metaphorical, so you can just take things to their like complete logical extreme to try and say the thing that you want to say about the world. And it's so political, so if there's things that you don't understand about the world that you want to, horror I think is a really good place to start unpacking that. Yeah, I could talk about that all night, so I'm going to put a full stop there before I filibuster on and on
Excellent.
and on.
Thank you. Manish, there's a question here which I might bring to you, given that we've touched on the changing titles to your novel. So Linda asks, who chooses or decides the title of your novel, the author, the agent, or the publisher?
That's a good question. I think in the case of my novel, it's been all three of us basically at different points. Obviously, when you're writing it, you just call it what you want. And the first round of submissions we did, it was still called that. Then we were thinking about calling it something else around the second time, and then when eventually, because the space between the second time and then the offer for favour was very short, so then I had a call with Louisa, and we just spoke about what to call it. The sense of place was very important, is very important in the novel, and so we were thinking about where it's located. And I'm from Leicester, so obviously I know the names of certain places, where it's set and the kind of area, and so then we landed on something that we were happy with, essentially. But I think it can be everyone, basically, in answer to that question.
Excellent. Gordon and Alexa, can I ask you, we've had a question about publishing trends. Hannah asks, how do you predict a trend? It seems romantasy has been the leading trend for a few years. How do you predict this or decide when the market has become too saturated? And what advice would you give for writers who don't produce work which falls into the current trend?
It's very hard to predict trends because romantasy couldn't be predicted, and actually most trends and genres are out there continuously, and then they suddenly rise to prominence around one author or another. But they also then they don't go away. But that moment of this is sort of the wave passes and something else comes back through. So I mean, writing to trend is you have to write super quick if you're going to write to trends, and to publish a book well. I mean, if I sold a book to Alexa now, she wouldn't publish it till 2027. So what's going to be big in 27? Who knows? Who knows? Is it a good story? That's the answer.
Alexa, do you have any
I mean,
thoughts?
I couldn't agree more. I actually actively don't look for books that are fitting into trends. I think I work for a literary imprint. I think there are amazing commercial divisions, particularly ebook led companies that are thinking really hard about trends and active markets, and are brilliant at that kind of publishing. But I don't think it's authentic. I think you need to write something that is truly authentic to you. Yeah, I think it's all the better if your book doesn't fit into a certain market or trend, because I'm looking for something distinctive and original. I want to set trends. I don't want to follow them, particularly as a publisher.
And a rich, complex book will have different aspects you can play up depending on how tastes are going at the moment. I mean, Lucy's got horror, she's got historical, she's got family relationships. There's all these layers and you could be, and probably in each piece of press you've done, Lucy, you've lent on one or the other depending on who you're talking to. Manish has a love story. He's got a migrant experience. He's got a non-metropolitan London story there. There's all sorts of different elements, and if any one of those was not playing well at the time we published, we would lead much more on the other. So I think having layers and complexity is a good idea rather than being hostage to fortune. And Lex, as you say, I think the digital led imprints, I mean, they are brilliant and they're very good at seizing the now and then keeping the best of those things. They also will roll them over into different, they'll jacket them differently, if tastes change. So yes, write what you believe in first and foremost.
Gordon, I've noticed I've been just having a little scroll through the questions that are coming in, and there's a few questions from people who are currently submitting to literary agents, and to kind of précis across them, people who are, becoming dispirited because they're not hearing back from people. And I wonder if you have any thoughts or advice in relation to that, into dealing with submission to agents and not hearing back.
It's very tough. There's probably people on this call now who are actively not hearing from me. I mean, Alexis, you said you get 15 submissions a week. Can everyone here imagine reading 15 novels a week and giving bespoke feedback to people? I mean, I've actually just changed something on my website to say that if you haven't heard back in a certain period of time, I'm afraid you have to assume it's negative, because I couldn't even write a polite note to everybody who approaches me, and of course everyone would like feedback, and I mean that's one reason something like CBC exists, because that is when you can have dialogue and engagement with other people. We're I'm afraid we're not a feedback service. We are picking out a few things that we think can turn into valuable commercial assets for the sake of the author and, our company on the way. So that's why it's keep going. But also, I think read the signs. If you're not hearing back, if you're not getting some engagement, there's something wrong in how you're presenting the work. There may be something, we've just said, don't worry about trends, but there's just something that's not landing now particularly well. I mean, coming back to trends, something could be a brilliant book, but just not fashionable at the moment. And you may then need to say, well, I'll put my whatever it is genre to one side and focus on something else right now. So I think you have to keep plugging away at it. But the more you've gone through filters, Manish talks about being in writers' groups, the more you can be confident about your work and know that it's worth continuing to push it, then I think the odds start to narrow that you'll get some engagement.
Yeah, I might add a couple of words to that, because I do think there's probably a lot of people in this call who are trying to submit to agents. And so I would just add, do submit to a few at once, in order that you're not sitting on your hands, and then move on to another few if you don't hear back or if it doesn't go well. And if you're having lots of submissions that are not getting replies, or that are getting non-personalized replies, then I really think it's a good idea to look carefully at the pitch package that you're sending out, and potentially to the opening of your novel as well. And a brief thought on that is that a lot of writers write towards the start of their story, and that there's actually quite a lot of padding at the very beginning before your story really begins. So it can be worth taking that submission apart again and looking at the different parts of it, and seeing if there's some way you can do justice to yourself and your writing better. We do have some courses on that. I'm not going to start plugging them individually, but I think it is a good idea not just to sit there and keep sending out the same thing over and over again, but to keep things moving and keep things changing. Right, I'm going to stop talking now.
But I mean, Manish and I did that. We had several rounds of submission. We changed the presentation. We did change the edit, and we played around with the titles. You have to be open. Yeah.
Because that happens not just when you're submitting to agents, but when the agent is submitting to the publisher.
Indeed.
As well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Exactly. So yes, I'm just looking for another question for our writers. We have one here on fear of failure from Jennifer, who says, do you have any suggestions on how to overcome the fear of failure, which can leave you doing research or avoiding writing rather than getting to the writing itself? Lucy, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes. I actually don't think failure is a bad thing. I love failure. I've failed so many times, and I think the thing that makes us all special is our ability to keep going even when you fail, and you can learn so much from experiences of failure. I hate that there's this culture of shame around not succeeding at something or failing at something, because actually those experiences are always the most valuable. So my advice is, don't be scared of failure, be friends with it. It's honestly one of the most beautiful things when you can go into face failure head on with a complete open heart and learn everything you can from it. It's to be chronically online, it's very slay. It's very slay to do that.
And Manish, do you have any thoughts on overcoming that fear of failure and moving forward with your writing?
I think fear is, well, I think the fear of failure should be dealt with by confronting it, by not being afraid, or by sort of accepting that it's there. So when I write a new piece, a short story or a novel, the first thing I always say is, I'm going to write a bad short story. I'm going to write a bad novel. And then I give myself permission to write something terrible and to fail. And it's okay, because I know that if I spend enough time and dedication on it, it will then become a good story. And you had that kind of knowledge probably because I suppose now these days, because I've had some success, I kind of think, okay, I know that I can reach a certain level. But the truth is, writing does involve a lot of rejection at every stage, like even at submission stage, getting rejected from publishers, and the publisher doesn't like something, you have to edit that, edit this. So the rejection, there's always a great kind of chance of you feeling like you're failing at something, but it's okay. You can get better. I think the trick is not to give up, because I think for every person who gives up, there is that one person who's persevering, who's keeping on going, and they're the ones that will get where they need to be, I think.
Excellent. A question to Gordon and Alexa. We've got a question about the importance of book fairs, which is just as we're approaching the London Book Fair next week. What's the role of book fairs in publishing, both for publishers, for agents, and for authors, with a fair like the London Book Fair next week?
That's a really good question. I do often ask myself the same question. Book fairs are really exciting times in the kind of publishing calendar. So I tend to use them as an opportunity to connect with both agents from all over the world. So from US agents, for example, and from publishers from all over the world. So I'm meeting fantastic Swedish publishers or German publishers who are interested in selling rights in their work, in their stories, in their authors. And I'm also meeting with colleagues from publishing colleagues, so editors, publishers from the US and from all over the world. So it's an opportunity to discover whose taste you align with. I think that's a wonderful thing, and it's a really exciting time to find people who you could share projects with. So it's that, and it's also from a publisher's point of view, we might, if we have rights in a title, we'll be going out trying to sell those rights. And we'll also be trying to drum up excitement in projects with international partners. So last year we had a fantastic debut novel called The Cautious Traveller's Guide to the Wastelands by another wonderful northern writer called Sarah Brooks, and all of her international publishers were in town, and we got together to celebrate the novel and celebrate her and to talk about how we were going to publish it globally. So those are some of the ways that it's useful from a publishing point of view.
Excellent. I'm actually going to turn a different question over to you now, Gordon, because I've seen we've only got a couple of minutes left, and there's a lovely question that I've just seen from Charlie. What do you still love about what you do?
Oh, discovery. I mean, literally, and I mean, and also, for as much as it's frustrating, the thing I arrive in the morning thinking I'm going to do is not what I have done all day, but occasionally at 6:30 at night, it suddenly happens. But discovering, I mean, there is nothing more exciting than, although it was a long journey, we began in 2019, here we are in 2025, but, reading that work of Manish's, loving it, knowing it had a market, knowing that lots of people we were talking to were just frankly wrong. We were going to land the right connection at some point in time. And being part of making something work. But then I think that conversation about failure was really interesting, and not looking over the horizon too much, enjoying the moment you're in now. You may get an agent, but the book may not sell. You may get acquired by a publisher, but it may not find its market. But enjoy that joy. But before you start thinking about what could go wrong, just try and live in the joyous moment of being part of that process. And that's what keeps me going. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a fabulous way to end the webinar. And I would like to say thank you so much to Gordon, to Alexa, to Manish, and to Lucy. And it's brilliant to meet you all. And I do urge you to read Lucy's book and to look out for Manish's book when it comes out. And thanks to my colleagues who've been helping here, putting lots of links in the chat. Do look out for the various other things that we're running, for our courses, for various other webinars and events that we do. We do want to engage with you, and there'll be a little something coming to you all tomorrow in your inbox, so look out for that. And yeah, thank you ever so much for joining us to help celebrate 250 deals. Thank you.